Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into the second, but used to be the third, but kind of isn't even like the first preseason game. The Ravens will be doing some team building activities and going out. I want to do all my team building activities in Phoenix, but not when it's 114 degrees. The Ravens will play the Cardinals, but probably not Kyler Murray and maybe not Hollywood Brown. We'll find out. Luke's been out in Owings Mills. He'll be there all week, or at least for half of the week. These preseason weeks, they really do. And when I was in Latrobe last week, Coach Tomlin, if you've seen the video, was talking about, hey, it rained this morning. We moved everything around. That's life. Things are going to get moved around. The schedule isn't every 7 days at 1 o'clock. This is one of those weeks to play with that. But again, I'm wondering who plays, who doesn't play, what this Commanders game means. The last preseason game was always trash. I don't know how John's going to play it. And certainly there's no gentleman's agreement amongst these 32 teams as to who plays where and why and when. And I think we found that out if you watched over the weekend where the Steelers starters were mauling the Seahawks. And in other cases, the Rams are never going to play a starter, right?
Yeah, and a lot of it tends to be cyclical, right? I feel like these things come back around, but it never goes back exactly the way it used to be. I mean, the reality is even teams that are playing their starters are generally not playing them very long anymore. And we'll see that over the next couple of weeks as well. So, I mean, the Ravens, they sat out over 30 players in the first preseason game, all but 3 projected starters, several key backups. They just held them out, and we'll see. I would anticipate we'll see a few more of those types out there against Arizona on Sunday night. But do I think it's going to be just everyone that's healthy? No. I still don't think we're going to see Lamar Jackson and some of the most key players. And we talked about this going back to last year after what happened. I think there's always that. There's always recency bias, confirmation bias, whatever information you want to latch onto to justify playing your guys or not playing your guys. It's there for you. You can look at the examples. The Rams don't play their starters. Kansas City does play their starters. And then Kansas City's been pretty darn special the last few years. So you kind of go down the list.
And 21-0 though, whatever John's doing, he's doing it right.
Yeah. Well, whatever he's doing, it has no correlation with them playing thetheir starters, because
when you do it wrong is when J.K. Dobbins is on a stretcher after the third play of the game. Well, right? That's when you're doing it wrong.
Right, but even that case was they played the plan was they were playing a series. So, or Gus Edwards and Marcus Peters got hurt in practice and suffered torn ACLs. So, again, this still comes back to ultimately, to avoid injuries completely, you need to avoid football altogether. That's just the truth. You're going to have
injured and I don't play football.
Yeah, exactly. So, the thing I think the happiest development for me over the last week was getting a little bit of a break in the weather. So, the Ravens got back on the field Saturday morning. They moved up practice a little bit. John Harbaugh had a little player gathering at his house, as some players posted about it on social media. But boy, it's been hot. It was funny. Daniel Faalele, the big boy, the 4th round offensive tackle out of Minnesota, who a great story, hasn't played a lot of football. He said the biggest thing that stood out to him about training camp was he had no idea how humid it was in Maryland. And I said to him after his podium session, I said, it gets humid here, but the last 10 days or so, a little extreme even for Maryland standards. I've covered plenty of camps, so well over a decade worth of camps now, and the last 10 days or so had been brutal. So,
the weird thing is you can smell it, right? When the grass has that mossy, awful, like that stenchy smell, and it had it in Latrobe the other day because it had been raining. When it has that wet barn smell, it's not raining, and now it's raining in the beginning of the week, so it's even going to be worse, right?
Yeah. So, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be as bad as it had been, where we're talking humidity and 95, 96, 97 degrees. So thankful for that break, but for the Ravens, it's crazy. We count down to training camp for how long, right? We go through free agency and the draft and OTAs and mandatory minicamp and who's there and who's not. And then you have that 6-week respite where everyone goes away in the NFL for a little while. And before you know it, you're at the point now where the last few practices this week where fans will be out there. They'll still, the team will stay in camp mode for another week or two, but that starts to wind down, and now you have differing schedules because they're going to go out to Arizona a few days early, and it sounds like they're going to practice. They might do a team building activity. We'll see exactly what John Harbaugh has planned, and part of it is we expect that we're still going to see a lot of starters held out. So we are at this point in the season. This is where I'd be remiss if I didn't mention we are getting to that point now where I'm much more on alert for Ronnie Stanley starting to practice and Marcus Peters starting to practice. And, J.K. Dobbins has already started practicing, albeit on a limited basis, and looking for Tyus Bowser. So, we're slowly but surely getting back into that territory in terms of waiting for some of these guys to come back off the PUP list and ramp up and get themselves ready for the regular season. Doesn't mean we're going to see them against Washington. Certainly not going to see them against Arizona, even if they do practice a little bit this week, talking about some of the aforementioned names. But, we're at that point now where if guys are going to be ready for week one, it's at the point now where they're going to be getting back on the practice field here pretty soon. So, that's something to look forward to. But otherwise, it's just a matter of continuing to stack days. I know Greg Roman said over the weekend that Sunday was their final install day. So the full Ravens offense is installed. It's at their disposal. And now it's a matter of paring it down in terms of what are they going to do best? What are some elements that you're probably not going to see quite as much? So, that's kind of where they are from a football standpoint. From a football business standpoint, Lamar Jackson spoke over the weekend. His update, which wasn't really an update at all, but hey, everyone's looking for a headline about Lamar Jackson's contract because it's a big story, was he did confirm looking at week one as a cutoff for negotiations, which we know it's a little more complicated when the player himself has to negotiate. Although I will point out, Eric DeCosta's done several in-season extensions. We saw this with Stanley. We saw this with Marlon Humphrey. If the Ravens were to come to Lamar with the offer that makes him happy, that he says yes, I don't think week one's actually the real cutoff. I think it's a matter of.
By the way, the more people I talk to, and I had Jason Reed on and other people out of town, and what I'm seeing in regard to how the media is portrayed this, if Lamar doesn't get $232 million guaranteed, that there's going to be a problem within the structure of it, right? Like that's where it starts, according to people outside the camp. And I don't know that that's right or wrong or good or bad or where you are with Jimmy Haslam and the outlier and where it is, but that's difficult, dude. You know what I mean? Like, if you would have come to me in February and said he's going to get a guaranteed contract in excess of $225 million because somebody else did, I would have said, well, congratulate Joe Burrow. That's great that he did that. I would have said, but the other part of Deshaun Watson and him getting on the field in Jacksonville the other night, and the video that I happily retweeted on behalf of every woman I know who's ever massaged me and not been sexually assaulted, I would just say that if that's the number, Steve's already made up his mind. This isn't Eric. It's not John. It's not Chad Steele. Trust me, it's Steve. So Steve's already made up his mind. I'm going to make Lamar the highest paid player and guarantee his money, and therefore do that to the other 30 owners in my club, because that's where it's going to go, that this isn't just Lamar versus Eric or Steve, or this is bigger picture for all quarterbacks moving forward and for where the sport is going financially with guaranteed contracts. And that's a path Bisciotti would never have wanted to go down. None of them want to go down. And that's the precarious part of this negotiation, especially the more I talk to really smart people about it.
Yeah, but I mean, didn't we say that in March though, that this was a very distinct possibility? And I don't think anyone, and look, we haven't seen definitive reporting from even the likes of Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport on how negotiations are and where they stand. So, because who are one of the great sources in league circles? Agents, right? Lamar Jackson doesn't have an agent, so you don't have that. So it's been much more speculative. But I think just looking at it from a Captain Obvious standpoint, they've been at this off and on, and clearly there have been some periods where they haven't had any talks. But we're now talking a year and a half, right? We're approaching that timetable as far as he was eligible for an extension after his third year, and he's now getting ready to start his fifth season. So how can it not be about a huge guarantee? And whether we're talking a penny more than Watson or whether we're talking about a slightly higher average annual value, it's very clearly about a huge guaranteed number, whether it's fully guaranteed or whether it's just such a large amount of guaranteed money. It still blows other quarterback contract deals out of the water. So it's where but I come back to this, Nestor, and I'm out there every day, and I see the fan and specifically the young fan reaction to Lamar Jackson. It's nothing short of a rock star. It is bigger than Joe Flacco ever was. Frankly, and again, it's 2022 and it's been a decade now. The reaction's bigger than Ray Lewis and Ed Reed got from young fans, talking 7-year-olds to 15-year-olds that are out there getting autographs. I mean, it is absolutely insane. So every time I see that, and every time I hear someone say what you just said in terms of Steve Bisciotti trying to hold the line here potentially, and understanding that there are 30 other owners who don't want someone to duplicate what Jimmy Haslam did and what Cleveland did. Although I certainly would feel more comfortable doing that for Lamar Jackson than I would have for Deshaun Watson. Let's make that clear distinction in terms of character and off-field decorum, all those different factors. But it's really easy to say those things in a bubble, right? In a vacuum, you can say, "Oh, we're not going to do that, and we don't believe in giving a fully guaranteed deal," and we can poke holes in that all we want and give all these reasons why we don't want to do that. But then you see what the reaction is to Lamar Jackson out there on a daily basis, and just how utterly insane. I mean, it is literally a rock star kind of reaction that he gets that dwarfs every other player on the team in terms of how fans react to them. And you say, really? You're really going to dig in on this and potentially run the risk if you don't give him what he wants, if you don't essentially give him a blank check, that you're going to potentially lose him in a couple years? You're going to go down this road of a franchise tag and all that. I mean, part of me just feels you're delaying the inevitable here. You're either going to pay him a ton of money right now, or you're going to pay him a ton of money and then even more a year from now, or if this goes down the road of the tag for a year. That's where I feel like this is going to go, unless there is a bad scenario that plays out where he gets hurt again, or he has a bad year, or whatever. And then when I look at that, it's like, well, is that really is that going to be putting your franchise in a better position then anyway? I mean, so I struggle in this, and I understand where the Ravens are, and the Bengals are going to be in the same place with Joe Burrow. The Chargers are going to be in the same place with Justin Herbert. But I still look at this, and that's why I felt like the Watson deal was such a huge sea change, because again, if one team was willing to do that for him, given all the off-field and PR, you would think a PR nightmare that you would care about, even though the Browns apparently don't.
How bad would the New Orleans Saints and the Atlanta Falcons want Lamar? Right,
exactly, and that's what I'm saying. If you say there's one team, all it takes is one team, then look at the other have-nots around the league and say, wow, Lamar Jackson is at least as decorated as Deshaun Watson, and I would make the argument more decorated, because Deshaun Watson hasn't been a unanimous MVP, and Lamar Jackson isn't someone that you have these, hasn't had these off-field transgressions and civil cases and all that. You have a much higher opinion of Lamar Jackson, the person, than what Deshaun Watson is. So that's where I look at this thing and just say, I know Bisciotti and Mike Brown and Chargers owners, I mean, they're all going to try to hold the line. I can understand that, but all it takes is one team. So you're either going to, in my mind, pay him what he wants now, or you're going to pay him even more down the line. Because unless you're rooting for a worst case scenario to play out,
unless you don't want him anymore at the end of this year, and
which I think is insane. Like that would be insane.
Well, especially for this organization that's built everything around him.
Right.
I've always believed that it would be much harder for the Atlanta Falcons to give him $50 million and then try to go figure out who their Nick Boyle and who their Willie Snead and who their Ronnie State. Like, whatever you do with him, you have to have other football players that complement him. I don't think you just stick him into the Cincinnati Bengals offense and think he's just going to throw it to Jamar Chase 18 times a game. That's not who he is. So
But it's not a completely different sport either.
But it cloudies up the negotiation part of it in my mind to say what would they be willing to do in other places in regard to trading, in regard to paying him, if indeed they don't want to give him $240 million. If they don't want to give him $240 million, then plan B is they're going to deal him and get whatever they get and do what the Browns did, have a fire sale. I mean, excuse me, with the Texans did, have a fire sale. I can't imagine that, but I do shudder to think that Steve might not want to do $240 million and be that guy. And clearly he doesn't want to yet, right? Because I think 240 would get it done, right?
You would think so, right? I mean, again, we don't know for sure. I mean, that's why, like, even as you mentioned, even really smart people who are well sourced within league circles, this is something that stayed in the dark. And look, that's a credit to Lamar Jackson, and that's a credit to the Ravens, right? I mean, they've done a very good job of keeping this in-house, and that's prevented it from getting acrimonious or hurt feelings or some bitterness. There hasn't been any of that at least it's been perceived. If there has been any of that, it's been kept behind closed doors. So we'll see how it plays out. But again, I keep coming back to what you just said. They've invested so much in their process of how they put together a roster. Not that I think, I mean, it's not as though the Ravens are playing a different sport. Let's be clear about that. They value their tight ends more. Sure. Do they have more of a value on their offensive line than other teams? Yeah, maybe in a different way, maybe a little more trending towards run blocking, but it's not as though the great teams, more conventional teams don't want a good offensive line. So I don't think it's so dramatic, but your point is well taken in terms of how the Ravens have invested, what their coaching staff looks like, positions that they valued that maybe aren't valued quite as highly elsewhere. On the flip side, even though I disagree with this mindset, they very clearly haven't invested at wide receiver nearly as much. And that's not to say that I think that they should have given a $20 million contract per year to Hollywood Brown, but that also doesn't mean that I think that their group is necessarily enough right now. But it's very clear, some philosophical differences. So
Joe Flacco's coming to town in a couple of weeks. Maybe he'd agree with you on the wide receiver.
Yeah. I mean, in that sense, maybe some things have come full circle. But at the same time, I keep coming back to, you won a heck of a lot of football games with this guy as your quarterback from the moment he took over midway through 2018. And we could talk about the postseason, but you could talk about Peyton Manning in the same terms 5 years into his career, and some other great quarterbacks 5 years into their career. John Elway was known as kind of a loser, right? Until he won 2 Super Bowls at the very end of his career. So perception, is not something that, what a guy is his first 3 years or first 5 years is not what they necessarily are going to continue to be their whole career. So from that standpoint, that's where I keep coming back to. You've had so much success with this guy. He's wildly popular with your fan base, especially your young fans, which we've talked about this, right? We've talked about season ticket holders and PSL owners and how that is shifting. And the first generation of Ravens season ticket holders are older. Those are the former Colts fans. And a lot of those people aren't going to games anymore. They're either selling their tickets or they passed them down to their sons or their daughters. So, when we talked about this, this really started when Ray Lewis and Ed Reed retired. And, obviously it continues when, Terrell Suggs goes out the door, Joe Flacco goes out the door. We're talking about 10 years now since the Ravens' last Super Bowl. I'm not saying that that's that's not a drought. That's kind of just the ebbs and flows of even the best franchises aren't going to win the Super Bowl every few years, other than the Patriots, I guess. But at the same time, you have this generational talent who does things a little bit differently that just young people gravitate to. And again, I see it out there every single day at practice. So the worth that he has, even beyond a football standpoint, for this organization, for this market, for Baltimore City, I still think that's something that a lot of people maybe have overlooked in terms of trying to figure this whole fully guaranteed deal, what percentage of guaranteed money, what's the average annual value. The football part of it speaks for itself with the success he's had, but I still look at those elements and say, wow. Every time I see the kids just screaming to the point where you can't hear yourself think out there, it's like anyone who suggests that they, any suggestion that they're not going to sign this guy, I'm like, come out here and hear this and tell me you're not going to sign this guy. So that's where I look at this thing, and whether it's next week, whether it's February or whether it's another tag season, I just feel like you're either going to pay him a ton of money now or you're going to pay him a ton plus some 6 months from now or a year from now. And that's where I kind of just feel part of this just feels like you're delaying the inevitable unless you're going to do the unthinkable, which, you get rid of Lamar Jackson at some point. I shudder to think what kind of backlash you'd have from a huge portion of your fan base, especially your young fans.
Last thing for you, Joe Flacco is going to start the first game, right? As long as he stays upright, I keep him out of preseason games as well as a 30-something guy, right? He's almost catching me in age at this point. We're the same age. That's a fascinating. All of this is fascinating because the league is that way once you get into the ebb and flow. And I thought Joe being Joe at the podium, I hadn't seen Joe do a podium in 3 years, and he's laughing and smiling and being cool and being like whatever. I can't imagine in the state of New Jersey that he's not going to be ultra motivated to start the season at least with a good effort. And I don't think the Jets stink. I'm not sure. But it's a fascinating matchup. And I guess this is why people do bet on the games and say, which side do I like and where would I go? The Jets have problem. They had offensive line where they have things happening there to start Joe Flacco as opposed to Boy Wonder. But it was kind of fun to see that. And it's going to be an interesting week around here 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now.
No question about it. And I mean, even from the gambling, I mean, the Ravens are going to be favored. They should be favored. The Ravens are a better football team. Lamar Jackson's better than a 37-year-old Joe Flacco. There's no, I mean, that's Captain Obvious stuff right there. However, just the juiciness of this storyline here. I mean, it's great. I mean, how could you not want something like the only thing that would make this better is if this game were being played in Baltimore. I mean, that would make it fantastic. So, it'd be fun. I mean, and look, I think there'll be some dumb takes out there on the internet and Twitter and everything because there always are about everything. Let's call a spade there, but it should be fun. And, I mean, I'd like to see Joe do well in however many games he might be filling in for Zach Wilson. And, by all accounts, it seems like he's had a good camp. And, we've talked about this before with guys like Peyton Manning and some other players who, sometimes there's a perception that they hold on for way too long. Look, teams are still willing to pay Joe Flacco. It's much more modest money than he used to make for the Ravens, but still willing to pay him money to be a backup and to mentor some young quarterbacks. And, he did it with Jalen Hurts last year before he went back to the Jets. He's done it with Zach Wilson now. He did it with Sam Darnold a couple years back with the Jets. So, I think these stories where some of these guys that are certainly past their prime and they're no longer the star that they were or no longer the peak player that they were whenever they were at their best, but he clearly still enjoys playing and he's going to get an opportunity to play against his old team. And, I think Ravens fans certainly are going to be rooting for the Ravens and should be. But at the same time, I think lots of Ravens fans are, hoping to see that, there's a sense that you could say, I hope he has an okay game, but not at the expense of the Ravens. I think there'll be that sentiment for a lot of people. So
Johnny, you never came back, played against the Colts, right? Like literally, right?
Yeah,
Neither
but I
did
do.
Burt Jones. I'm just trying to think of quarterbacks that came back. Trent Dilfer played against us, I think, for a minute.
Yeah, Trent Dilfer did. Yeah. And in terms of high profile, I mean, Ed Reed played with the Jets against the Ravens late in the 2013 season. If you recall, he hadn't been playing for the Texans when they played early in the season. So, so you had that. So, hey, Joe Montana played against the 49ers, right? I mean, this is as it pertains to some of the big headlines of
it's no big deal.
Yeah, it isn't in a big picture historic sense, but for Baltimore, that's pretty cool. I mean, I think it could be a lot of fun, and it's kind of crazy to think though there probably aren't a ton of guys. I mean, even from 2018, there's been quite a bit of turnover. I mean, certainly a solid, at least a big handful, let's say, of guys left from then. But
there aren't a lot of chances for the Ravens to go onto the field and play against somebody who has a ring.
Sure.
I mean, Kyle Juszczyk still in the league. I'm just trying to think of a handful of guys that are still around. The Michael Orrs and the Bryant McKinneys and the Terrell Suggs, they're all gone, man. There's not a lot left.
Well, and you even Kyle Juszczyk was the year after the Super Bowl he was drafted. So, there aren't many of those guys. I mean, there's still a few lingering around the league, but
Juszczyk wasn't on the Super Bowl team.
He was 2013. Because remember he was
that bet. I just in my mind it didn't,
Well, remember he was
Poorly.
drafted as Vontae Leach's replacement, and then they brought Vontae Leach back for 2013.
That's right.
So there aren't that many, and so be fun. I mean, my goodness. I mean, not that the Ravens and the Jets have any semblance of a rivalry, per se,
John
but
just screwed your whole life up. You're going to be the next 3 days trying to figure out if there's anybody left on that roster who's still in the league that you haven't thought
trying
about.
to think.
At some Corey Graham on the end of a roster, or like.
I mean, that's the big thing. Like you could look at someone like Tyrod Taylor,
Josh Bynes.
I mean, Josh Bynes.
There you go.
Josh Bynes has been gone a couple times in his comeback. So but there aren't many. Justin Tucker. I mean,
Sam
it's
Cook
not
and Kerry
many.
Williams are on the edges, right? They're on the fringes right now, right?
Yeah. I mean, Sam Cook on the coaching staff. Kerry Williams was a coaching intern in the spring. So I mean, it's
Jamil's around.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be fun. I know.
I love talking about the championship team, especially when I'm putting Purple Rain 2 out this week. So go read it,
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure John Harbaugh will downplay it. I know Joe in his comments tried to downplay it, but he also acknowledged, I've thought about it a little bit. I mean, how could you not? So it'll be fun.
It's funny. He referenced Steve Smith in Carolina and like all of that. And I'm thinking, Joe, you are the Super Bowl MVP here. Carolina has never won. You know what I mean? Like even though Steve Smith's going to the Hall of Fame, allegedly, we'll see if he gets the votes. But with Flacco, he won here. It's a different. I find the city's relationship with Joe, and I'll probably write about it that week, to be really weird.
It's complicated.
Like, to me, and it shouldn't be. He was the best guy.
Yeah.
He was, like of all the people that have ever been here that I've covered, remains my favorite athlete, and I think that should carry some weight after 31 years, 38 years of being around sports here. That's how I feel about him, and it has nothing to do with him getting sacked or throwing an interception or not having receivers at the end or doing press conferences or not. I liked his honesty. I even like seeing him in a Jets jersey being Joe. I miss those kinds of insightful, thoughtful sort of he was worth going out to talk to because he always did say something that most quarterbacks don't say anymore. I mean, and Aaron Rodgers is his own animal. By the way, I'm doing a whole segment on shrooms this week. This Sports Illustrated gal who wrote the shrooms piece, Julie Kliegman, is coming on. We're going to talk about shrooms and Aaron Rodgers. But as an example, there's a million different ways to cut a quarterback. Joe to me is still, even though it's all over with for him here and whatever, Joe to me is still the greatest story in Baltimore, this side of Ray Lewis in the modern era for me. And Lamar has to go win a championship to be that guy. Yeah,
fair enough.
You don't yell, he's the Beatles and all that. Better make sure he's the Monkees and not the Beatles.
Well,
or the Beatles and not the Monkees, I should say.
I understand.
A band that is not you don't want to be a one-hit wonder and not win a championship. Joe did it all. Joe won this. He's not getting
Joe was never unanimous at NFL MVP. So let's not sell Lamar too short here.
Not like what
do you mean?
The MVP thing. Win me a championship. This is
come on, man.
Joe will never
No.
Joe won a championship.
Stop. Wait.
Isn't appreciated.
No, let's not
appreciated here. He really isn't.
Joe's appreciated here by a lot of people. I think you're listening. I think you're putting too much stock into the vocal minority that shows up on social media. Twitter is not real life.
Whatever flowers Tony Siragusa would get, or whatever flowers anybody who's popular. Justin Tucker, he's the GOAT. He's the GOAT. Like all of this love, he eats chicken. God bless chicken pool. It's great. Drink coffee. It's awesome. Rofo. But Joe did it, and it's like he didn't. That's the really weird part.
I understand that. I'm going to stop you on diminishing being the unanimous NFL MVP. I mean, this isn't being the All-Star of the Pro Bowl. I mean,
that isn't a bigger deal than winning the Super Bowl.
It's a big deal, though.
See,
you're doing some of the stuff that people do to Joe Flacco. You're cutting down Lamar Jackson's accomplishments here and diminishing that. Don't diminish the fact that the guy's a unanimous MVP at age 22.
I think he shouldn't play but I'm just saying Flacco if he's not signed.
But my point is we don't
story altogether as to where this goes if he's not signed and playing for $1 million a week or whatever, whatever it is,
My point is, see, you're doing exactly what people do to Joe. We don't need to lift up one while tearing down the other. Both of these guys are extraordinarily accomplished in different ways. Lamar Jackson's already been to 2 Pro Bowls. Joe Flacco turned down the chance to be a Pro Bowl alternate one time, but never made a Pro Bowl. Joe Flacco, Super Bowl MVP. Lamar Jackson hasn't done that. he'd be the first to tell you that. And yes, that's going to be a huge part of his legacy, whether he leads the Ravens to the promised land. At the same time, Lamar Jackson has had far more regular season success than Joe Flacco had at any point in his career. So they're different, right? They're very different stylistically. Their profiles are different in terms of accomplishments, but we don't need to tear down one and to lift up the other.
And that's I mean,
I know.
When you
you sounded that way.
Winning one playoff game in 5 years, that's a tear. It's not a tear down. I'm trying to compliment Flacco and say,
right.
He played championship games. He threw a winning pass to go to a second Super Bowl. He won the Super Bowl, and he's just, he's okay. You know what I mean? Like that is the feeling on him, and I think that's unfair to him. So that's where I'll step up, because nobody will defend Joe besides me, because I'm a bootlicker for Joe. Yeah, I like guys that bring parade.
See, I don't think that's. I still think you're looking at this through a social media lens, which is not real life. The loudest, most idiotic takes tend to be the ones that are magnified. So my point is, yeah, there are people that underappreciate Joe Flacco, but there are a lot of people that very much appreciate what he does, in the same way that happens with Lamar Jackson.
Well, the week of September 11th would be a great week to.
I just took a little exception to. You sounded like you were diminishing the fact that the guy was a unanimous NFL MVP, which has only happened twice in the history of the league.
Monkeys. The Beatles are the Beatles are there. They did it. The Monkeys had screaming girls for 10 minutes, and they were cool and they were fun. But
although Joe Flacco wasn't the Beatles either, though. Let's be clear about that.
You better make sure this isn't like with Lamar. If he's still playing at this level of 32, 34, and has 2 championships or like that, then you say the $250 million is well spent. And it's not if you take playoff ousters 2 or 3 more years in a row. If that happens, the cacophony and noise for him being the Monkeys and not the Beatles will get louder, as it did for Peyton Manning, as it did for Dan Marino, as it does for anybody who doesn't win.
Well, that's also
it will for Joe Burrow in Cincinnati if he doesn't win. Or as it did for Matt Ryan, who had a 20-point lead and blew the Super Bowl, right? Or the franchise did. So there's all of that for all of these quarterbacks. I'm just saying with Lamar right now, I am not sure he's the Beatles. And the fact that all the screaming is out there's a lot of things that have to go right.
But that's the present.
Championship.
That's the present.
Championship.
Well, he won one.
But he's not the Beatles.
I mean, I'm not
he's more like I'm trying to think of somebody that's a really good band.
No, but my point is, we're still, it's easy to compare. It's easy to compare legacies of players who've already, their careers are already done compared to someone who's ongoing. Yeah. 5 years into his career, Peyton Manning was not perceived the way that he is today. And that's my point. So again,
here you go. I'll give you modern. Is Lamar Jackson in sync, or is he Justin Timberlake? You know what I mean? Like that's the next 5 years that they need to do the things to build a championship. And that's why we talk about the importance of Ronnie Stanley. That's why we talk about the importance of his contract and what it means to wide receivers when he doesn't have any, because he's making $52 million a year, right? Like, so and that's
although they haven't
after they gave Joe money.
They haven't tried to give him wide receiver. They haven't tried to give him wide receivers when he was making $3 million a year. So that's just an organizational philosophy at this point. Let's call a spade a spade. I mean, at least with that.
They haven't tried to give him wide receivers. They drafted Hollywood Brown. They've drafted.
They haven't, and then they traded him. You can't come on. You can't tell me that they
$20 million wide receiver. They're giving his money to.
I didn't say.
But they are. There's only so much money.
Okay, but on the flip side, if we're going to play this game, Joe Flacco had Derek Mason. He had Anquan Bolden. They drafted Torrey Smith.
Until they brought in Steve Smith. Bolden's money.
I understand that, but I'm just saying, let's act like the Ravens have done this. My point is, let's not act like the Ravens have done this, have made this phenomenal effort to put all these wide receivers around Lamar Jackson. They traded Marquise Brown and they haven't replaced them. I mean, I'm just saying.
They've replaced them.
With who?
Well, I guess that's why they spent the number 1 draft pick last year on Bateman, right?
Okay, but Bateman was already part of the team last year. This reminds me of people saying, well, they're going to replace Anquan Bolden with Dennis Pitta. Well, Dennis Pitta was already part of the team.
Mancini has to go because we need to make room for at-bats for the next group. Like, that's pretty much what this is. I mean, with Hollywood Brown, it's about
my issue's not with my issue's not with Bateman. My issue is Devin Duvernay and James Prochet as 2 and 3, whichever order you want to put them in, rather than I think 3 and 4 would be much much better, much more appropriate. Anyway, you and I are
Lamar
large.
will get blamed for it if nobody can catch the ball.
Sure.
It'll make Lamar the Monkees to do that instead of the Beatles.
Yeah. Very well possible. Although, it certainly helps. Let's not forget about Mark Andrews. But you and I are actually, despite our back and forth banter here, are much closer to being on the same page and talking about this. The point is, going back to what we were talking about, it's gonna be fun, with a little Joe Flacco reunion here, and some of what we just talked about. I think some people will talk about, and I'd like to think we were coherent mostly in what we were saying, but it'll be fun. And as it relates to that, hey, we're under a month away now. It's going to be here before you know it. So lots to do, lots of players to still get back on the field, and lots of work to be done. But certainly, the lights at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, in terms of getting through these preseason games and kicking it off for real on September 11th.
All right. Well, I hope in the end that Lamar's legacy is more. I don't even Led Zeppelin. Where am I going here? Which are the eternal greats? I was trying to go with the eternal greats, but the jury's still out, and they got to sign him. And we got football on our brain. We got baseball on our brain. The Orioles are in a pennant race. Luke is monitoring all things Orioles. They're on the road most of the week this week. Ravens headed to Arizona. I am headed down the ocean, hon. I'm going to Salisbury this week. We'll be with Mayor Jake Day this week. Also with our Senator Ben Cardin in Ocean City, Maryland on Friday for Mako. We are broadcasting from Eldersburg next Wednesday at Liberatories, and then on Friday at Rock Salt in Westminster. Had a great time at LP Steamers last week. Great stuff on the radio all week long. The Best of Baltimore Party, talking Baltimore Magazine with Max Weiss. Talks some Baltimore City issues with Amanda Yeager from Baltimore Business Journal. And having some great football conversations as well. Jason Reed joined me at length to discuss the contract of Lamar Jackson, and mixing a little rock and roll fun into. There'll be Duran and Rod Stewart. Maybe he could be Rod Stewart. Yeah, there you go. There's the eternal voice. I think maybe that's Tom Brady at this point. I am Nestor. We are WNST AM 1570. I'll be comparing bands and quarterbacks, and wait till I get to baseball players and try to compare Cal Ripken to Tom Jones. We are BaltimorePositive.com. Stay with us.